fireside chat portion of this session. And I'll start by asking Victoria to introduce herself and what organization she's from and her role, and we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Good morning once again, everyone. My name is Mukuria, also how I prefer to be called Mukuria. I am a career psychologist and a retired major from the Kenya Defense Forces. I am the founder and CEO of the first military veterans organization regionally, if not just locally. And yeah, that's basically what I do. I guess the question I get asked a lot is how does a career psychologist come into talking about legal matters? But that's where my work has essentially taken me. And as a psychologist, essentially, I think it has put me at the forefront of being able to witness people and therefore witness how mental health conditions, externally caused of course, are detrimental to not only people's mental health, but their human rights and their prosperity or lack of it, that right now has actually become intergenerational. So that's me, that's what I do, that's why I do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mukuria. It's so interesting to see where your career as a psychologist has taken you. Matthew, if you can please introduce yourself and the organization you're from.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I want to take the chance to say hi to you guys earlier. So, my name is Matthew Arun. I'm a senior associate with Performance. I work specifically in the projects, energy, and infrastructure team. My practice ranges from anything related to energy, renewable energy, carbon contracting, the carbon contracting space, green infrastructure, those products, I'm sure you're wondering why am I here because we'll get to that more later.
Thank you, Matthew. We're so excited to have Moments here. And you probably know they're one of our strongest legal members in the network, and they've assisted us on so many projects, so we really do appreciate you. And the True North Society has also made many requests on our forum, so it's nice that we could get them both here in the same room. For those of you who came in a bit later, my name is Farine Alibai, and I'm the Legal Program Manager for Africa for Trust Law. Yeah, so it's nice to meet you all. And Mukuria, if you could just tell us a bit more about the organization and its mission, it'd be great to hear.
Sure, my pleasure. When I began True Law, it was in the spirit of being able to offer care and protection for all military veterans, which I also happened to be one. I think what compelled me was that I don't think if I was not a psychologist, I don't think I would have been able to get over the hump of war-related PTSD. And there really was nowhere else I could be able to go to get the kind of help that I needed in the kind of psychological space that was necessary to just provide for me what I required. So True North was started on that premise, to be able to help military veterans heal from war-related psychological wounds to a point where they could now successfully transition and reintegrate successfully back into our environment. And I really want to emphasize the word reintegrate. A lot of people say military veterans need help to integrate. No, we need help to reintegrate. Because we were there before, we are coming back, but when we left, we are not the same people when we are coming back. And therefore there needs to be a very tailor-made and curated process to help us reintegrate. And so for that, we started as, as a mental health component, holistic care, of course, that involves the family, is what now led me to be extremely overwhelmed by the need that was there. So whilst in the beginning I was dealing generation that went to the war in Somalia, I came across veterans who were carrying wounds from the 70s. I came in contact with veterans who were carrying wounds from the 1982 coup. I came in contact with veterans who were, caught up in the different skirmishes that have happened over the years of the military in this country. And of course, the question that I had to ask myself is, where do I need to go to build the capacity to hold all these people? But also accept that as a person, as an organization, I did not have the capacity to hold that space, and I needed, number one, a law to be able to hold the government responsible for taking care of its veterans, as is a universal practice. But of course, I didn't know where to start. So I was seated next to a friend of mine and I said, this is what I need to do, where do I start? And that's how I got into trust law, and from there it snowballed and snowballed and snowballed. I'm sure we'll get more into that. So yeah.
Thanks, Mukuria. That's so interesting, and I think you bring a very multi-dimensional perspective to what you do. And just having served in the military yourself and being a psychologist, it lends a lot more. It's definitely more insightful from you. Matthew, could you just talk a little about the assistance that you've provided to the True North Society through the Trust Law Pro Bono Service?
Sure. I think to talk about that, first I start from how the instructions came to me. Essentially, the way Pro Bono is structured at Women is we have our head of the entire Pro Bono organization seated in South Africa, and requests are always sent all across all the offices throughout the farm. And it's a fully voluntary basis, and it's up to any buyer who is willing to assist to take it up. Now, I had a keen interest when I saw these specific instructions, specifically because one, I think there's been a really big mental health challenge in the country, and I think it's been seen more and more, particularly when COVID struck and we started seeing so many cases of domestic violence, suicide, especially among the youth, including some of my friends and people who I'm close to. So when these instructions were sent, for me it was just an opportunity to make some sort of difference, especially in a very sensitive space, in the minimal way that I could, minimal of that way. Now the instructions were specific to, well, when it came, it was very vague. I remember I had to have a call with Mukuria from the onset, because it was just research on the Defense Forces medical state. So the first place, I did not even know the Defense Forces medical state. So I took it up because I could tell that it was in relation to exclusion of mental health in the Defense Forces medical state. So we had a call with Mukuria, and she basically gave me a whole background of everything that happened in the military, which, to be quite honest, a lot of us civilians are very ignorant about, and many of us do not know what exactly happened. So that's how I got to work on these instructions, and it was more about finding ways that specific exclusion was the challenge. And I think based off those instructions, it sort of also snowballed into more and further instructions and further work, just in relation to the military, in relation to military healthcare, not just military mental healthcare.
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, mental health is such a live issue that really needs to be addressed, and sometimes there's so much stigma around it, especially in Africa. I don't think we talk about mental health enough, but it's definitely coming up a lot more. And just to say that the difference you've made is definitely not minimal, and as we'll hear more from Mukuria, the impact from just responding to a simple request as a lawyer can be huge. And I think fora like this really highlights that. So Mukuria, I just wanted to ask you, what was your experience working with Bowmans as a farm and of course Matthew?
Well, I think pleasant is the one, you know. I started this conversation by telling you that I am a career psychologist. I have never really taken interest in the law. I have a constitutional medal. You know, I got a medal for defending the constitution that, you know, if you're a soldier, you get one. But what does it really say? I have no bloody idea. So it's been such a pleasure in the sense that that engagement has also grown me professionally, you know. I was talking to someone outside, and the first thing they asked me is, outside, and they were like, "Are you a lawyer?" And I was like, "No," you know. But of course, I usually have to check myself, and I'm like, "Yeah, I may know maybe a little bit more than most psychologists because, again, you know, because of Bowman's, because of, you know, Martin over there with TK, you know, because with all the engagements I have with all these people, they are also learning new information from me. And their first reaction is, no, 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 that can't be true, that can't be happening. And I'm like, but here's the document, it's a public document. And they're like, oh, you can't be serious. And so it's been a kind of a transfer of knowledge and information. It's been, you know, a dialogue and a conversation and an exchange. So it's been pleasant to be able to grow my understanding and to connect the dots within the system that I'm operating, where I'm now able to relate mental health and human rights and influence law that is actually going to speak to both of them, that leads to a better outcome for military veterans in our families. And in the long run, this entire country. So it's been amazing. Yeah.
That's really amazing to hear. And Mukuria, could you speak a little more about the specific request that Matthew worked on? We heard from him what it was like from his side, but I think it would be really good to hear from you as the True North Society what you needed help with and what that meant for you.
So there have been many, but I think let me talk about the firecracker one.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, I think that's the one that I think is able to just take the whole cake. So we launched the Chelsea here. I've been in Chelsea for many years, and you know, we began the conversation of how do we compel the government to take responsibility for military veterans in our families, like every other country that has decided to engage in war, because it is a conscious decision and it has outcomes, and these outcomes impact the soldiers more than anybody else and the families. So, you know, we started that conversation, and in 2019, August the 1st, our petition was read on the Senate floor by Senator Agiri, and so the process started from there. And I promise you it was a process. First of all, it sent shockwaves because when you're talking about military veterans, everybody defers to the Kenyan Defense Forces. But there is nothing in law, whether it's the KDF law or the constitution, that compels the KDF to actually take care of veterans. Like, you're no longer able to serve us to your fullest capacity. Bye. See you. Right? So, of course, it has been a conversation of even educating parliamentarians who, for whatever reason, thought and believed that the KDF actually takes care of military veterans and families and widows and fatherless children, but that doesn't happen. So it's been a process. You know, we met with the respective committees. We showed up physically, and then COVID struck in 2020, so we could no longer have that engagement. We ended up having a virtual session, I think on June 2021 or somewhere there. And that's when we had the Military Veterans Bill first gazetted, Military Veterans Bill 2021. That was first gazetted. And it was an interesting process because appreciated what it meant because of the invitation to create this law together. And so we did that, and now it became a question of when is COVID going to end so that the report can be made. The chairman of the committee is no longer there. The bill has moved from this committee to another committee. Like that, it's been that crazy. So whilst, we're in that process and now waiting for the first reading to happen in the Senate floor, and of course we are addressing, meanwhile we are still addressing issues of pensions and gratuities, like we're still working. And then on early March, the leader of majority for the National Assembly brings something called the Military Veterans Bill 2022. So now we have two bills. The Military Veterans Bill 2022 in the National Assembly and 2021 in the Senate Assembly. So the 2021 is for veterans, by veterans. The 2022 one is like a year. Pure and simple. So you can go and download it and read it and decide for yourself what it's, whether it serves veterans. Of course, we felt it doesn't. And this is the part where I was grateful about knowing the lawmaking process. Thank you for that. He educated me on the lawmaking process. Let me tell you, we have been to school. I have been to class. And why this is so important is because then I was able to channel this information back to the veterans. Because one thing, like, people don't understand, soldiers don't know their rights. Soldiers don't have rights. In fact, that's the best. Soldiers don't have rights. And I'm not just saying this. I go to Article 24, the limitation of rights for serving soldiers and the National Police Service personnel. Those rights are limited. So why would you exercise a right you number one can't, that you don't even have? So so that's how a lot of human rights violations have been able to, perpetuate and happen and stuff like that. But also, there's also just with that toxic narrative of the work of soldiers is to die for their country, which of course is not it's not true. It doesn't have to be like that, right? And even if they do, what happens to the widows? What happens to the fatherless children? Who takes care of them? Because they no longer come under the care and protection of the military, that's for sure, right? And I think the military is one of the few organizations where I am a soldier, my whole family is in this with me. It's not like any other job where you can say, you do whatever you need to do, what. And it's especially so if the family lives in the camp. They also have to, they just become militarized, right? So now you can imagine when all that is taken away and, people struggle with that. So what was so important about education about that process is that I was able to bring veterans once again and say, here's the Military Veterans Bill from the KDF. We shall look at it and make a contribution because the public participation invite has already been sent out. We shall answer the call. And so we did for like 3 days. We used to meet for like 5 hours or something because you have to really take time to listen to people, and it's not just a contribution they're making, they're also coming with their stories. And the thing about veterans when we come together, we talk in a way we don't talk with other people because other people may not really understand or care to understand. So when people come to such a gathering, it's almost like I am here to just have some form of catharsis. People will talk about how they lost their jobs, they'll talk about what they do now, they'll talk about what they're struggling with, and you just have to listen because they have nowhere else to actually express this. So it was very successful in that it was a document I was able to put together, which brings me to the trust law procedure of you put in a request and you have to wait a month. The first reading of that bill happened today, which was a Tuesday. Thursday, the public invitation came out. Within the next 2 weeks, it was the deadline. And that's not an accident, ladies and gentlemen. That is a process of exclusion. Okay. And so here is Mukuri, a career psychologist with very little legal knowledge, but now that she was in the army, how does she use these tactics she has learned to deal with this issue? No, it's true. It's all tactics. And so I'm grateful for trust law because me, I tell them everything. I am extremely frank and transparent. I need this. I know your process is long, but I need this because if you can't help me, then we're dead in the water. So I thank Trust Law for coming through for us. And of course, on the same breath, I have to thank Kieti because they worked under such a short time, so much pressure.
Responded straight away,
Yes.
which is rare.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And those are some of the things that honestly encourage me because sometimes it feels like a journey we are walking alone. Other Kenyans are not involved. But when things like those happen, and I'm like, oh my God, Kenyans do care. So within a very short time, he was able to take what we had, they sat together with the other members, they discussed, we had a back and forth, and they came up with a beautiful document with legal language expressing exactly what military veterans had said. And that is very, very important. Because, for us, if we were to put there, first of all, and put psychology language, this is very traumatic, this is passes, but, you have people talking about Article 24, the Constitution, Chapter 1, I don't know what, and I'm like, yeah, this is it, and that's how we were able to, finalize on that and send our memorandum. And even when the veterans saw it, they were like, yeah, this is what we talked about. So you can see that connection there, and we made it work in a way that can actually be received and understood by the person on the other end who doesn't care that veterans don't know their rights, have not been trained on their rights, have not been educated, they just want to see a document with legal language, and we were able to provide that. So the second reading was done about 2.5 weeks ago. And of course, I knew, because I've been in this process long enough, so I have friends and I'm able to say, what is in the house business? What's going on? When are we getting? So Tuesday, second reading, you're there in front of the, TV, and we're watching. Okay. And so we're watching, and we're waiting to hear what we have put in our memorandum has been included. And then they finish, and then they say the next item, and I'm like, hold up. Where is our contribution? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, I went and slept. Not that sleeping because I'm tired. That's sleeping because I need to shut out the one right now. And I also need to shut out my insides because I'm like, this is mischief. Immediately I knew this is mischief. But again, where do I start from? Where do I begin addressing the fact that a memoranda that was prepared from the contribution of 100 military veterans, who this bill is about, has not been factored in, right? And so this is not even the kind of thing that, I woke up and I had a new sort of drive, and so I started making phone calls until eventually somebody says to me, but wait, we didn't receive your memorandum. And I'm like, what? From that committee. And so that's when I knew now where to begin. And it happened at night. And the following day, I woke up and I went to Parliament. Nobody had invited me. Nobody knew I was coming. And I was telling my daughter yesterday, was it? Yeah, yesterday, because she came from after. I told her, Parliament, see, kwa mama yako unaenda tu. It doesn't work like that. But I was like, I think this is an important issue, and I think the solutions lie in Parliament. So I went there, and I was myself, and I happened to get up to, the necessary office that I needed to get to. But what was also interesting to me was that they were also surprised. also astounded. They were also shocked. Number one, that there was a similar military veterans bill 2021 in the Senate, but also that our views that have been presented were not sent to the Committee for Defense and Foreign Relations and considered. When I got there, they actually said, no, we never got your, like, that's your problem, maybe you never sent it on time. But you see, part of the thing about learning from how the world works to self-protect is I came with evidence. Here's the printout. I sent it to you. And I also came with other letters printed out because I had worked with that specific office before. So you can't say you don't even know me. And so it was difficult to have these competing thoughts of, you know, that I could actually be talking to the person who pressed delete when Miranda came in. But I was like, that's not important right now. Right now, I just need to be able to make sure that the views of all these people who are depending on me are incorporated. And I met some pretty understanding people, and I'm grateful for that. But what also is important in this process I learned is that I didn't deal with anybody else besides legal counsels, right? And I also found that interesting because then it meant this process just needs a certain higher level of engagement and thinking. So why I mention that is I think you really need to prepare the organizations you support with some form of, I don't know whether it's training or just provision for information about some of these things that are required. Because that lack of knowledge, I think, excludes a lot of things that could be accelerated. And, you know, having come up with a solution, I felt comfortable when we came to the third, no, not the third reading. So this is what I've learned. There's something called question to the House that happened on a Friday. Then on Tuesday this week, there was something called Committee of the Whole House. I was very satisfied with that one because our views were incorporated. It wasn't all of them, but a key one that I felt, even if that's the only one I got, is important, is because that bill by the KDF had actually sought to exclude veterans on the basis of self-harm as a result of mental illness and psychological disturbance, and it had sought to exclude on the basis of addiction. And yet these are the two things that are really, really like the core of human suffering, especially for soldiers. So at least I'm happy that the only way to now describe a veteran is as long as you have been in service, you have a service number, you are a beneficiary. End of story. And that mattered a lot. But I have, of course, and now where it has reached, I understand nothing much can be done in terms of making any further changes because it's also a political process. And the leader of majority has to be able to, you know, find a balance, right? So I too have to find a balance and release, which I did. So one of the things that, of course, are quite unconventional is that the Veterans Affairs are going to be under the National Security Council, right? The person who is going to lead the Veterans Affairs will come under the command of the Chief of Defense Forces, and it is now within that bill that is going to become law that he can deploy this person, he can sack this person, he can basically do what he wants with that person. So that will not serve the veterans at all. Because if you want to stay in the job, you don't want to be deployed or lose the job, you will shut up with your human rights issues. Because now we're in a situation where people who are no longer under the limitation of rights requirement are now under the people who are in the limitation of rights requirement. And you know, I was telling Matthew earlier, it's not even a conversation. Veterans Affairs will be crushed. They are not going to be a priority at all. And so it's going to be a continuous process to try and bring a veterans, the military veterans law, which is going to become more for the service of veterans. And that will take a lot of legal acrobatics that trust law is going to continue to be my partner. I'm still going to be WhatsApping and emailing Matthew and Martin and saying the process is ongoing. You need to put on your boots and tukutane kwa kiwanja. So yeah, that is essentially the key one that I wanted to talk about. But of course, there have been about, I think, 15.
Yeah, I think so.
But that was, I think, the most critical one because it's the overarching one. Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks for taking us through that, Mukuria. It's really interesting to hear, and I think you captured it correctly when you said it requires a lot of legal acrobatics. I think that's the right term. I'm sure Matthew agrees. But it's so unfortunate that you were blindsided by this new bill. It just doesn't do any justice to, I mean, these are the people who literally serve us and keep us safe, and then we are not, looking after them. And as you said, Matthew touched on this, that us as civilians, we actually don't sometimes know a lot about soldiers' rights at all. And you're saying that soldiers themselves don't know, or they don't have those rights, to put it more, yeah. So I think that this actually serves to show us all. I mean, it's a learning lesson for all of us in this field, and I know it's quite close to home because a number of members of our foundation actually have come from military families. So it's I'm just glad that we are able to have some role in, furthering the rights of veterans and their families. But I think it's still a long road, and hopefully we can get further and further, make inroads even further. But thank you. Matthew, it would be interesting if you could just tell us a bit about what your experience was working with the True North Society and other non-governmental organizations that you worked with as part of the Trust Law network.
I think because I've only been performance for 1 year now, just about. So this has been my first instruction with Trust Law. And I think it's been very, what Maria said was fully right. It's been such a learning process for me as well, particularly learning about the ongoing inside the military. I remember joking that during national holidays we see the parades and everything, and we think everything is okay. But we never get to know much more about what happens internally, the whole hierarchy system, and how that's what's being tried to be played out here, and how basically, of course, the limitation of rights works in there, and everyone is sort of bending to their boss above, and if that's the culture that's introduced, even to the veterans, nothing much will happen. And the veterans are not within that hierarchy. And also learning about how, veterans are sort of in, I don't know that call it a limbo or something, because you're not civilians, as you fully say, and you're also not military personnel. So you're just somewhere there. So I think that was very interesting to learn. Just learning how it's a very, I think the one thing with acrobatics was very correct, because you need a very outside of the box approach in terms of addressing all these matters that pop up. So even on a personal level, it improved my thinking on a whole different scale, because you can't, as lawyers, we are taught things in a straight line, sort of. And,
For sure.
there's always the phrase that the law is very clear. When it comes to the military, I can tell you the law is not.
It's not clear at all.
So I think it's been interesting. It's been a really interesting learning process. And looking forward to going on and continuing to help people.
Thanks, Matthew. And it's nice to hear that your first instruction has actually made quite a big difference. Although there's still a lot to be done, but it sounds like it wasn't a very easy task at all. So we do appreciate it. And Matthew, why did you personally want to assist on this project? I know you touched on it a little before in terms of mental health and people around you, but if you could just talk about your personal interest in taking on this particular project, because I know Bowman's, it's literally all voluntary. You're not forced to take on any pro bono matters, and that's what is so amazing, which a lot of law firms can learn about, but we can talk about that later.
Well, just so the first point was, of course, just wanting to make any meaningful contribution to the mental health care space, and that to me that was the key thing that sort of rang a bell in my mind when I wanted to take up these instructions. I was really interested, particularly in learning more about the military. I know Korea knows my relative in the military, but
Oh, so it's even more personal
yes.
now.
But for me, it was just a point of who better to help other than any veteran. So it was more about wanting to help in the military in the mental health space, and it just happened to be a bonus that it would be helping military veterans. So I think that's what called out to me most.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I think it's always really interesting to hear what makes a lawyer pick up a pro bono project. I know there's so many competing interests, and it's not, I've also been in private practice, and it's definitely not easy at all to take on any extra work. Every minute is accounted for. So I think that's what makes it so amazing that, especially, I do have to give a big shout out to Bowman's, because just all over Africa they've taken on so much, and their pro bono practice has really grown organically, just from the willingness of lawyers to take on projects. But that's not to say we actually have very many law firms within Africa which we are very appreciative of. But I think one day we should actually sit down and just get some lessons on how you run your pro bono practice, because I know a lot of law firms also struggle with starting one. They have the willingness to do it, but just how to go about it and how to make it grow. And it was really nice to hear that personal side of it.
I think it's a very delicate balancing act. I'd say that, especially coming from a very well, woman is a large corporate firm,
It
so
is.
our work is so corporate oriented that it's really this is really one of the outliers of our instructions, because we're mainly dealing with people in the private sector. Also, by the time you're undertaking instructions with an NGO such as Full especially, you've gone so way far from what the farmer should have done. So to be able to work in a farm which can actually take up those instructions and say, fine, get on with it. Of course, within certain limitations, which hopefully will grow. I think that's a special thing, and it continues to build on. And as the balancing act continues, I think also more awareness just about the social impact that these instructions happen to provide. I think maybe that's something Trustlaw can continue doing, and also organizations like Trustlaw, because you see, for me, this spoke to you on a personal level.
Yeah.
And I think for such a pro bono practice to grow, it needs more, I don't know how to call it, the word I just saying for them, basically more awareness to people of what happened around, and you just need to convince one person. So just like
Exactly.
this convince you.
And then it sets you up for doing so much more. I think these impact and success stories really help to inspire both sides, the NGOs and the law firms, to see what can be done. And that's something we're working on a lot more this year, is just getting those stories out there. because it really does encourage both sides to do more. And this legal assistance then helps NGOs to work on what they're strong at and not have to worry about legal costs and hurdles. But I think one of the benefits of pro bono for sure is, as you say, you're a corporate firm, but it allows lawyers to just get out of that zone. Sometimes they have personal interests and they can actually work on very different matters. And it also strengthens you as a lawyer, being able to, you have the skills, but you don't usually apply them in that way. But this sort of makes you do that, and it brings you back to reality of what's on the ground. Because we definitely do appreciate commerce and business, but I think this also lets you work on that. And a lot of us went to law school to be able to make a difference. So I think that it's been really interesting to hear from both of you. I think we have to wrap up now so that you have time to have some lunch. But if you could just briefly talk about how it was for you to, you've worked with trust law very many times, so if you can just briefly talk about what that's like for you, our service, just working with trust law. And I know that you would wish to have quicker responses sometimes, but we do actually rely on the capacity and availability of law firms since they are doing it pro bono. So it's just unfortunate because we can't really put them on the spot in that sense. But what we do is if we don't get a response after a week, we do personally try and follow up to get you that assistance.
Okay. I think what comes to my mind right now is honestly just how privileged I have been. I truly recognize the privilege that has come my way because with all the work that we've been able to do, true enough, would never have been able to afford it. You know, like when we started this process of the military veterans law, honestly, and Chelsea can bear me witness, the first lawyer we met asked me, so how much has True North set aside to convince parliamentarians to vote for this bill into law? That's what I was asked. And I was immediately triggered. Because as the first psychologist who set up the psychology department in the history of our military, I've had the opportunity to go to all the services, to go to all the units, all the garrisons, peacetime locations, the theater of war. I have done it all. And so for me, I was like, seeing people lying face down in the sun, shot to hell, and then someone is going to ask that the veteran community fundraise so that we can have a military veterans law. I was triggered, I was offended, I was annoyed, I was pissed, I was going to bite his head off. But then again, some of the realities that I've come to accept is that there's a big disconnection between the experience of soldiers in this country with the citizenry of this country. For soldiers, there's no confusion because they understand that they are dying for Kenyans, but Kenyans do not understand that soldiers are dying for them. And that disconnection is up to the legislative arm of this government. So it's a difficult reality, but it's nonetheless reality. So once again, if I want a different reality, then I have to put in the work, which is awareness, like he has said. Bringing the stories of military veterans into the forefront. I'm sorry I can't say the stories of soldiers because they are bound by the limitation of rights. But military veterans, we are not. Oh, but we are about to lose that the moment this bill becomes law. So this might be the last time I'm talking like this. Next time I talk like that, muni organize mkuja to central.
Let's hope it doesn't get there.
So maybe that is also a special request that I have to make, that you guys will protect my rights. Oh, because no, once it becomes law, they're coming for me. Before they've not been able to come for me because there is no law that can, yeah, but now they'll come for me, for sure. A lot of people don't even understand how come I still roam around this country of ours, that I've not been arrested or, done for many things, but that's because I know my rights, which I'm about to lose. So for me, it's really been a privilege because there's no way I could have afforded everything that I've been offered, everything that True North has been offered. So for me, it's just really a privilege. And it's not about perfection; it's about progress. Because because when I started with you guys, you said I put in a request, it will take a month, I don't know what. But look at what happened when I put in the request for the military veterans bill, the public participation. The turnaround was quick. So for me, I guess what I'm saying is that I hope that you can be able to meet our very unique needs as they continue to evolve. I hope you can meet us at our needs. I hope that you will be able to, just make those exceptions for issues that really, really matter.
Yeah.
Because can you imagine if we didn't have the support to make the memoranda to contribute towards the military veterans bill 2022? I mean, of course it was because somebody believed in it, yeah. But now imagine if there was no evidence that we even did that. It would be like, then what are we doing? So for me, again, I am sitting in privilege. And I can only believe that there will be an organic, dynamic expansion and growth as we continue to interface.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Mukure. It's so good to hear it from your perspective. And we do really rely on our legal members for this. So thank you very much to both of you. I think I'll now just let Jane wrap us up so that we have time for lunch and just be able to chat further together since we are all here in person. It would be nice just to have a meal together and talk a bit more. So thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.